Good evening. Hope everyone is well. Thought what we'd talk about today is potentially the options that Boris Johnson has got to try and remain in power. We'll do, I say the usual thing, we've only just started these, but what will be the usual thing of a particular topic to begin with, because we have to feel for the poor people who will be watching this not live and they don't want to be jumping between topics, and then we'll move on to general topic, whatever people want to bring up later on in the stream as well. So hello to everyone who's here. So just to sort of go along to lay some lines down here, first of all, so there's two aspects really to what Boris Johnson can potentially do. As far as I'm concerned, he's basically knackered, because the Privileges Committee will now be investigating his behaviour. The only way he can get away with it is on a technicality, because the normal reasoning here is once the police have finished their investigation, there surely can't be that much longer, but I don't know. Maybe it can run all the way up until summer. Maybe it'll be after summer when the Privileges Committee can start investigating. So maybe this whole thing can run the rest of the year. They cannot credibly say that he hasn't deliberately misled Parliament. It's too ridiculous. That being said, if they decide to come up with that, it's 2/3 Tory MPs in it, so it hurts the Tory party. So that's very unlikely. So then let's say they find him guilty, which almost certainly they have to. So then they have to recommend a punishment. So that punishment inevitably has to be a suspension. What Boris Johnson has done is more serious than what Owen Paterson did. Owen Paterson got a fairly hefty suspension. So Boris Johnson will get a suspension of at least 10 days. I mean, even that would be less than Owen Paterson got. Now, here's where the technicality comes into it. Ordinarily, if an MP receives a suspension as a result of a standards investigation of 10 days or more, they are subject to a recall petition. So if 10% of the registered voters in their constituency sign the petition, that MP is no longer an MP. There'll be a by-election. They can stand in the by-election. They're not disqualified from standing in the by-election, but they're not an MP until that happens. So obviously that is Boris Johnson over. Now, the technicality is the legislation says, it suggests that this recall petition is as a result of a suspension recommended by the Standards Committee. Now, this is the Privileges Committee. It is the same people. It's the same MPs at any rate. The Standards Committee is the Privileges Committee plus some non-MPs. But there might be a technicality that gets, but I don't know. Apparently, from what I can gather, it'll be up to the Speaker of the House to decide. Now, the Speaker of the House might decide that there needs to be another investigation to decide whether there should even be a recall petition. So it could get very messy. But the bottom line is, if Boris Johnson gets away with it on a technicality, the Conservative Party will take the flak, because everyone will know Boris Johnson's done wrong. They'll know he's been found guilty of lying, deliberately lying as well. And there it is. Oh, in fact, well, we'll do this little aside as we're talking about this as well. So James Carter has just said there, the Durham MP has been crying to the police to try and drag Starmer down over his beer, apparently both the same. So yeah, I mean, this is what some right-wing commentators and politicians are trying to do. They're trying to say, well, if Boris Johnson's cake was illegal, why wasn't Keir Starmer's beer? The cake wasn't illegal. Nothing to do with the cake. This was the issue. It was the fact that Boris Johnson had a gathering that was not reasonably necessary for the purposes of work. So he had social occasions, parties. Keir Starmer was having a meeting. The fact that he was having some food and drink was because he was nowhere near his home. The other people that were meeting weren't near their home, and there was a lockdown, so there was nowhere to get food. So you couldn't go out for food, so you had to get it in. It was a takeaway. But they were in an office having a meeting, and even if they broke to have some food, it was reasonably necessary for the purpose of work. So, you know, but again, this is why a lot of people, I mean, myself included, were saying when they started banging on about the cake, it's nothing to do with the cake. Don't get hung up on the idea that it was anything. Same with the cheese and wine. It wasn't the fact that Downing Street staff were eating cheese and drinking wine. It wasn't the cheese and wine. The wine was unprofessional. It's unprofessional to be getting drunk at work. But that wasn't what was illegal. What was illegal was having a gathering that was not necessary for the purpose of work. You know, if they were going to say, oh, just having a meeting, you have a meeting remotely like we are now. We're all socially distanced and we don't even legally have to be. At the time, this was easy. If I can do it, the government can also do it, of course. But, so, yeah, Boris Johnson basically is knackered. All this attempt to drag Starmer into it is just what they're trying to do there. And I'll be talking about this sometime. I've been planning this video for ages, but other things keep happening. What they're trying to do is they know that Boris Johnson's guilty. They know that the public know he's guilty. So Keir Starmer at the moment is looking like a more honest politician. So what they're trying to do is try and make out that Keir Starmer's just as bad. So that then people will say, oh, Boris Johnson may be guilty, but everyone's just as bad as each other. That's what he's trying to do. But that's not going to save Boris Johnson's job. So what can he do? Now, someone on Saturday mentioned the possibility of triggering a sneaky general election. Now, I talked about the same thing when MPs foolishly, in my view, repealed the Fixed Terms Parliament Act. And then lo and behold, it was Sunday, because this was the Mail. Do you know what? The Mail on Sunday was writing an awful lot of interesting articles, and obviously the Angela Rayner one took most of the focus. But they also wrote an article which suggested that Boris Johnson by proxy was threatening to trigger a sudden general election to keep the rebels from circling. So here is the concept, and let's discuss how feasible this is. I will just pick on this point though. Tom Beerus there saying Starmer is totally incompetent though, and Labour has no plans. I think objectively he can't be incompetent because the vote last week, if nothing else you see as Starmer has having done as being successful, and he's actually done a lot of work under the bonnet that people will reasonably not have seen. Getting that, Boris Johnson has a large majority, right? He has a huge majority. He has supreme power. And yet he is going to face an investigation that is going to utterly ruin him. So that's not incompetence. The other thing about Labour having no plans, it does have plans. It communicates them poorly, though. That is a reasonable thing to say. DC, thank you very much. It says, please do a video on the future about Scottish independence and what options there are for Nicola, since Boris will block another referendum. We don't know that Boris Johnson will block another referendum. In fact, Boris Johnson may not even be in a position to block another referendum. I have done videos on it before. I do videos on it, tempting fate, whenever something new comes up. At the moment, there is a bit of news sort of on the Scottish independence issue, but I don't know that there's enough in it to get my teeth into it. So the new issue at the moment, I'm just going to do this very briefly so I don't go too much off topic, is that the Scottish Information Commission, this has got nothing to do with Westminster or anything like that, the Scottish Information Commissioner has said that the Scottish Government should publish its legal advice on another Scottish independence referendum. Which is interesting, but I don't know that there's enough for me to say about it other than that's interesting, but obviously there's going to be appeal. But anyway, Boris Johnson on to what he can do. So, could he trigger a general election as a threat? Now, obviously, at the moment, I don't think anyone is really ready for a general election. Labour are not ready, the Lib Dems are not ready, the SNP are perpetually ready at the moment. But at the same time, the SNP, do they really stand to gain seats? They've won so many seats at the last election. It's not necessarily ideal for them. They can only risk losing them, really. So no one's really ready, but at the same time, the Conservatives would almost certainly lose power. And I don't just mean they'd lose a lot of their majority. They would clearly lose a lot of their majority. even if they could somehow form a government after a general election, then the Prime Minister is going to be in the same position Theresa May was when she pissed away her majority. So she's knackered. Or whoever, Boris Johnson at the moment would be knackered. The threat is there. It's like Boris Johnson. It's like mutual assured destruction, isn't it? It's Boris Johnson saying, look, I am, if I'm going down, I'm taking you lot with me. Because remember, Boris Johnson doesn't care about the Conservative Party. People sort of said with Theresa May, she did what she did for the Conservative Party. She put party ahead of country. Boris Johnson puts himself ahead of everything. Boris Johnson doesn't give a crap about the Conservative Party any more than the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg, Steve Baker, or any of the other UKIP entryists do. It's a means to an end for them. I mean, political parties are often a means to an end for people. But there is that threat. Would it work? So we have to ask, how could Boris Johnson trigger an election? Now, the Fixed Terms Parliament Act is gone. It doesn't quite mean that Boris Johnson can just go to the Queen and say, dissolve Parliament, we're having a general election. But it does probably mean he can get a general election. So what happens now is, you used to need a supermajority. With the Fixed Terms Parliament Act, to have an early general election, you needed a supermajority voting for it, about 2/3 I think it was. Now it just needs to be a simple majority. So Boris Johnson could put a vote to the House of Commons that there be a general election. Opposition parties would vote for it. I think even the SNP would vote for it. I don't think we'd suggest that they would not. Labour would all vote for it. Lib Dems would all vote for it. The DUP may not. The Conservatives, but if Boris Johnson went for it, so may some of his backers. So it is quite likely that it would go through if it just needed a simple majority, because it ironically wouldn't need that many Tory MPs voting for it. So then you have a situation where he triggers a general election as a form of mutually assured destruction. Whether he would do it is completely immaterial. What would really matter is, one, are the numbers there for him to do it? And two, because he'd have to be abandoned en masse by his own MPs for it not to go through. And two, would the people who are potentially trying to bring him down at the moment believe it? Would they believe that he would actually go? Because from their point of view, if he does that, he's not Prime Minister anyway, because he will lose the general election and then he'll be forced to resign. But I suppose it comes to that point where if he's going to anyway. But anyway, let's have a look. A quick few comments on that before we sort of move on, because I've got another extra thought on that. Let's have a look now. Boris must be removed. He's already compromised from US business interests, and that's, well, as any number of Tory MPs compromised by US business interests. Well, Rishi Sunak. People were saying, what was he doing? Cost of living crisis. What was he doing in America talking to healthcare executives? And that's precisely why he let a Russian oligarch walk about with all his toys for months too. Well, Boris Johnson is compromised much more serious, I think, than the general Tory MP who is compromised by their own corporate interests. He is potentially compromised with blackmail. We can't know, but at the end of the day, given that Boris Johnson has frequently gone for long periods of time to stay in mansions of actual known Russian spies, and I don't mean Evgeny Lebedev, we don't know he's a Russian spy, but we know his father was. And I don't think the KGB is something you just leave either. And of course, his money effectively derives, Lebedev, even junior, could not have the level of wealth he had without Putin's approval. So the idea that Boris Johnson, without even his security details, spent long periods of time socializing in the home of Russian spies, where of course it will all have been bugged, all the rooms he'll have been in would have been bugged. You've got to think there's very, very likely some, well, we don't know there's potential for blackmail, but it'd be huge suspicion, surely. Oh, interesting one. I suppose if we go back slightly to the Scottish independence one there, because unfortunately I can't resist an interesting question. The bigger question is, what is up with the English that they do not want to be independent? See, the thing is, right, I don't think there's any such thing as the English. People talk about the English. It's like, okay, there's a geographical area called England, right? But in terms of the English people, I would argue there's no such thing. Absolutely no such thing. Like, you can think of distinguishing features from Scottish people, Welsh people, Irish people even. English people, what is there? What is an English trait? What is an aspect of English culture? It doesn't exist. In fact, and so badly doesn't it exist. Partly you could argue that this is part of the reason why we're in the problem we are. For example, we have devolution, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Ireland and Wales. We should have much more. You know, there isn't that much really that a national government has to do. If you look at the United States, I generally don't look at the United States as a model. But if you do look at the United States, where you've got this idea of state matters and federal matters, you know, you can see that you can have a real separation of powers there, and the whole thing works pretty well. You know, so why wouldn't you have greater devolution in England? Like, at the moment, so let's say you don't have to be Scottish, but you live in Scotland, right? So in the Scottish elections, for Holyrood elections, you can vote for whichever party or candidate you think will best represent your interests in Holyrood. Okay, so you may be motivated by something like let's see now, health or education, something that's clearly devolved and got nothing to do with Westminster. But then when it comes to the Westminster elections, you could vote for a completely different party based on what you think would be best for national concerns, say foreign affairs or something like that. And you may come to different conclusions. You may prefer one party to run things in the Scottish government, or the Scottish Parliament, I should say, because you might not get into government, compared to the Westminster Parliament. People in England don't get that. And people will say, oh yeah, but you know, in the Westminster MPs deal with the English issues. But they don't, because you might have different ideas. You might think that one particular part, you might think, for example, that Labour are better dealing with healthcare matters. So you want to vote for Labour in like a national parliament, or even split up. But you may prefer the Conservatives' attitude to, say, foreign affairs. I might have to have an argument if you do, but you could think that. But you can't now. You've now got to come up with one party that has to deal with everything. They say England depend on Scotland's vast resources. I will not get into that, but this is not true. No part of the UK is dependent on the other parts. No part is a drain. All of them pull their own weight. But they say England needs regional government. Yeah, so this is what I'll get to. The problem is that a lot of people in England don't want it. And now it's one of these things where you can argue that people will, if they understood it, they'd probably be in favour. I would argue that, because everyone will do that. If someone thinks a particular policy would be good, they will always assume that if everyone understood it, that they'd be in agreement with it. But they didn't. That was the thing. I think the last Labour government really tried to push the idea of more devolution in England, and people generally rejected it. It was found that people weren't in favour of it. It's an absolute madness. But anyway, right, a couple of questions. So first of all, Michael, thank you. It says, hi, what would happen if 300 MPs had enough, walked out of Parliament, rented out a hotel ballroom in Manchester and established a rival Parliament? Not a thing, because there's no legal precedent to do so. Outside of Westminster, an MP is just a person. They don't have any powers. Their only powers are in Westminster. So nothing at all with that. They would just be pointed at and laughed at. It's a nonsense. If you're talking about trying to start a revolution, you need more than a ballroom to start a revolution. There was a question there as well. Do I think a new referendum on abolishing first past the post voting and bringing an alternative vote or proportional representation would pass this time compared to 2011? No. This is the thing. It is, for me, the most important political policy now of our time in this country. We need electoral reform of Westminster. The problem is, see, I've seen people, I saw Femi today, for example, saying, look, Labour members are in favour of it. Even the unions now with Unite are in favour of it. Is it Unite or Unison? Sorry, it was Unison, wasn't it? No, it was Unite. It was Unite that now have now said they're in favour of it. He said the only person standing in the way is Keir Starmer. Well, we also know that's not true because Keir Starmer's in favour of it. But it's potentially a vote loser. The problem is the Conservatives argue all the time. They did so recently when they changed how mayoral elections work in London. They argue that first past the post is simpler and fairer. They will argue, and they've done this before, they will argue that any other form is more complicated and therefore you don't know what you're voting for. You know, you poor stupid little voters, you'll be too complicated for you, and it works. It'll be less fair because they'll say, well, you know, because people will suddenly get a government they're not expecting, and more, they'll say it's more expensive. You know, they will pull all the stops. And the thing is as well, so will the media, because remember, the British media basically exist to represent the interests of the billionaires. That's why the billionaires bought it many years ago, because they cottoned on to the idea that this is the way to control the population. Why is Elon Musk buying Twitter? Maybe he's just an eccentric madman who wants a new toy. But at the same time, you know, the media is the way to control the way people think. It's like a child, isn't it? You know, when we talk about a child who's been well brought up, what do we mean by that? We mean that all the adult authority figures in their life all taught them the same set of values. What happens when a child gets a different value system from different authority figures? If the mum says one thing, the dad says another, the teacher says another, all of a sudden there's no universal truth. So they pick their own. And what do you pick? You pick the one that suits you. So the billionaires know this. Present a united front. What happened during in fact, this happened in the US presidential election in 2016, but it happened in this country, the Brexit referendum. What happened? Facebook largely was targeted, but basically ads on social media were targeted at people who were deemed to be malleable in terms of how they might vote. And it was all the same message, but coming from lots of different organisations. It all sounding like academic research groups, all sounding very official. And people were bombarded with these videos or ads and messages and stuff like that. And it didn't look like it was from a political party. It looked like it was from an academic research paper or something like that, or group. And it was all saying the same thing. It did it in a different way. It all came to the same conclusion. And it was found out that basically all these things came from the same people. You know, it's just a way of getting everyone to go, no matter which media platform they turn to for their news, they're getting the same story. And so people just accept it. Hi, Max, how are you doing? But anyway, let's go into some other general ones here. Why doesn't Starmer ask for more corrections of Boris Johnson's lies during PMQs, like we delivered faster vaccines, could left the EU, employment numbers, etc.? In some cases, it does grieve me when he lets things slide. I don't know whether it's right or wrong what he's doing. I can see the logic in it. That's not me saying it's definitely the right thing to do. I can understand that when Boris Johnson says a thing, if you keep trying to ask him to correct it, first of all, he won't correct it, but you're not asking him questions. While you are asking him to correct the thing, the thing he's just said, you're not actually asking him another question. So Starmer is obviously going in and he's remaining focused on his task, you know, and it, at the end of the day, it's working to a certain extent. Yet there are times when I think to myself, well, and the same was today. There were a couple of times when I thought to myself, he could have tackled this, he could have said this, he could have said that. I'm not saying I'm 100% right that he should have done. It does annoy me when Boris Johnson keeps getting to say these things. Like again, today, apparently for the 10th time, I'm not keeping count, Peter Stevanovic is. Again today, Boris Johnson said, what was it he said now? He said, about the number of people in employment again. They're saying there's more people in employment now than before the pandemic. It's a lie. It's been pointed out to be a lie for a very long time. Boris Johnson was even forced in an interview to accept that it was misleading, and he claimed that he'd corrected the record in Parliament. He hasn't corrected the record in Parliament, and he keeps saying it as well. So he keeps saying it. Yeah, it's annoying, but I would imagine the reason Starmer isn't picking up on all these is because it's a distraction as well. Boris Johnson will use it as a distraction. So Starmer will say, oh, this is wrong. So here's the way it will work. Starmer will say, what you've just said is incorrect, blah, blah, blah. Then he'll ask his question. Boris Johnson will ignore the question and address the bit that Starmer's saying is wrong, and he'll say it's not wrong. And then he'll sit back down, completely ignoring the question. So Starmer clearly, as I say, is just taking the view, forget it, focus on the question. And, you know, I don't know whether it's right or wrong. Do I think austerity was a deliberate attempt by the Tories to damage public services so they could target immigrants as the cause? It wasn't to target immigrants as the cause, but it was to, well, David Cameron did admit that it was a policy to shrink the state. You know, it's the typical conservative, not just Conservative Party, but just around the world conservative idea that to remove the state from people's lives. Like we should live the law of the jungle. You know, maybe have a few police around so that we don't take the piss too much. But other than that, just leave everyone to it. Preserve the hierarchy. So if you're born into wealth and privilege, you remain in that elevated position. So austerity was absolutely, basically they had an opportunity. So after the global crash, obviously the economy suffered. So they got to blame Labour. Labour were the party in government. Okay, it's an easy thing to do. Then they got to say, well, we're in this economic situation, you know, there's no money. Labour have basically blown all the money, which is absolute rubbish. There's no such thing as blowing all your money in government like this, because at the end of the day, every year you get more tax revenue in. How are you blowing it? What are you blowing it on? You get another tranche of money from taxes, don't you? It's ridiculous. But anyway, that's what they tried to say. It's like a person going broke, isn't it? And then they said, so what you need to do in that situation is tighten your belt. So we're going to have to reduce spending on this, that and the other. And it was all rubbish, because what happened is they contracted the economy even more, because people were losing their jobs, and people also feared for their jobs, even if they didn't lose their jobs. Because the economy was contracting, they feared for their jobs. Are you going to go out and spend on luxuries when you're a bit worried about your income, future income? No, you're actually more likely to put a bit aside. But anyway, there we go. If Boris Johnson goes in the next 6 months from Callum there, and the next general election is in 2024, I mean, it might actually technically be right at the start of 2025. What do I think will be the result, in my opinion? So the natural response to that is to say that Labour could absolutely win this. Not a majority. I really don't see a majority on the cards. I see a minority government supported by others. Where I have to be really hesitant at the moment is I do not know under what conditions the next general election is going to be fought, because it's not going to be like the last one. The Conservatives are pushing through electoral changes, electoral reforms. Now, this country is in dire need of electoral reform, but the Conservatives are not pushing reforms that are in our interest. They are pushing reforms that are designed to allow them to retain power with a smaller and smaller number of votes. You know, a small minority of votes. They might only get a third of the vote. I mean, they probably get a bit more than that, but they could get, you know, way fewer votes than last time. And bear in mind, the proportion of the votes that the Conservatives got last time was by no means the lowest. Labour have had a lower share of the vote. In fact, I can't remember, it may even have been 1997 when they came to power that Labour got a small, I'd have to look it up to be certain. They may have even got a smaller share of the vote then. But I'm pretty sure in one of the general elections that Labour won last time, they got like less than 40%. You know, and it's just, in first past the post, the way to beat it, you don't need a majority of votes to win a majority of the seats. You just need to target the right seats. You need a very good strategy, very focused, and you need to win a lot of seats by a small margin. Don't waste time targeting. And that's what I mean when people moan about Labour's policies on this, or but a majority of the public are in favour of this, so why don't Labour get in favour of it? Because that doesn't matter for winning. You don't win an election with a majority. Proportional representation would be totally different. And that's another reason for supporting proportional representation. Not only is it more representative, it stops parties having to be as strategic, not they have to be strategic of course, but as strategic with their policies. Labour right now are backing policies that are not necessarily their core policies. They're also refusing to back policies that are very much in line with core policies. The reason being that they're being strategic, and the way to win with first past the post is, as I say, it's identify a relatively small number of seats and win them by a small, just enough to flip it, just enough. It's depressing that the Tories are able to win with such a low share of the vote. I mean, it's depressing that anyone would. I mean, I'm a Labour supporter, so yeah, I mean, if YouTube wasn't, and I certainly wasn't doing YouTube back then, if it was around and I was commentating on politics 20 years ago, you wouldn't have heard me complaining about Labour winning a majority with a small share of the vote. But I wouldn't have said it's a fine system. I have been against first past the post ever since I've been really aware of what it means, because it's a nonsense. It's a nonsense way to organise elections. Absolute nonsense. Thank you, Liam. Good to see same day reaction to PMQs today. This is, I mean, yeah, doing this, the new schedule has multiple advantages. It's been clear to me for a long time it was the right schedule to do. I just stopped doing it because I also knew, and I do get comments and I do apologise from people saying it's knackered their morning routine. I am sorry. You do still have Wordle at least. But you know, it was the right thing to do. And obviously when I got a hit in the old views of the last couple of months, it was like, can't just accept that and do nothing. But yes, it does mean there's pros and cons to it. So with PMQs, it does mean I can get it out the same day as I used to. There was a time when I used to be able to get PMQs out the same day. Then I changed to 6 a.m. and 12 noon, and obviously not. There is a potential downside is that sometimes you might, because obviously I have to get it well before 5 o'clock. Usually I have to get it done at 3 o'clock to make sure it's uploaded and no problems for 5. And then what if something you talk about there's developing information later? So there is that as well, but on balance, it's an advantage to be able to talk about the news on the day itself. If Tory lose local elections, will Johnson Party follow their normal and kick the leader out? It might be interesting on Saturday. We'll see what seems to be the hot topics. It might be interesting to talk about the local elections on Saturday as a preview for next week. But I don't know that the Conservatives are going to lose the local elections in the normal sense. A couple of things to bear in mind. It is possible. It's really difficult for me to say because I don't really trust. There's no polling out there on the local elections that I trust to give me a good picture. Because the thing is with a local election, right, and a council seat, some of these council seats, you've only got like a few hundred people voting in them. How do you poll that? So I just think with a general election, even then a lot of pollsters make mistakes in the way they try and predict, but there are some that do it well, and two of them, YouGov and Ipsos Mori, are, when you compare what they say just before the election with what happens in the election, it's pretty close. So they're pretty good. And their methodology to me makes sense as well, as someone who's not uninitiated in statistics. But for local elections, I just struggle to consider any polling reliable. But I just don't get how the Tories will lose a lot, because the last time these council seats came up, because remember, it's not the whole country, it's just pockets, and the last time they came up was 2018. They're every 4 years, so it's 2018. The Conservatives had already been in power for 8 years by then. So if you're going to get any effect, as you do, where the party in government does poorly in local elections. Well, they were the same party in government in 2018. You can't lose the same seat again. You know, any seats that the Tories lost in 2018 are still lost to them. You know, they can gain them. They might gain some. In fact, you'd expect they will gain some. So it's really a case of, I don't know. Maybe Labour will storm it. Maybe the Lib Dems and the Greens will make major gains as well. In fact, the Lib Dems and the Greens are probably better placed to make gains. Labour did pretty well in London in 2018, but there are still plenty of seats where they could still beast it. Who knows? But I'm quite sure that the way it'll be spun in the media is with a pro-Tory bias. So it'll be very much a case of, look, you know, this is much better than we were expecting. Oh yeah, we took losses, but you expect losses, party in power and all that. But we were expecting much worse losses. This is brilliant, yeah. So I can't say, I'm not going to make a prediction. I cannot see Boris Johnson being under pressure after these local elections. That doesn't mean to say he might not face a leadership challenge. Because again, we keep hearing that Tory MPs are getting ready to put their letters in after the day after the local elections. So, I mean, I can't, you know, like I have to keep saying, the issue of whether or not Boris Johnson faces a vote of no confidence is entirely down to 54 Tory MPs who may or may not be strategic. They may or may not be good at political strategy. You know, they may make the correct decision, they may make the wrong decision. The interesting question then will be, however, so let's say 54 MPs put their letter in. So there's going to be a no confidence vote. How will the rest vote? Because I think there are a lot of MPs who don't want Johnson to go just yet. But can they afford to support him? Knowing that that probably means keeping him for another year. Because there was already an attempt to change the rules and it failed. So they have to assume that if Boris Johnson wins the confidence vote, he is safe for a full year. That's Tory party rules there. Safe for a full year. They may think to themselves, I don't know about that. We don't want him gone yet, but we really don't want him here in another year's time. Have a referendum to see if the country wants a second Brexit referendum. Yeah, have a referendum to see if we want a referendum. Well, I mean, I was saying recently, so when we joined the common market, as it was then, the EEC, we did have a referendum to confirm it. So we entered, a couple of years later, there was a referendum, 1975, wasn't it? It was before I was born. I think it was 1975, to ask the people, do you like it? If not, we'll leave, no problem. But, you know, we just thought we'd ask you. Now, here's the thing. If the Conservatives are so certain that Brexit's the right decision and really popular, why, it's 2 years after we left. Well, it's not quite, actually. If we talk about the single market and customs, it depends what you call Brexit. Is it leaving the EU or is it leaving the single market and customs union? But it's, you know, it's over 2 years since we left the EU. Shouldn't the Conservatives have the confidence to issue another referendum and say, are you happy with it? Would you like this? You know, maybe even give a few options. Would you like us to, are you satisfied that we've left the EU under the conditions we have? Yes or no? Would you prefer it if we rejoin the customs union? Would you like it to rejoin the single market? You know, would you want us to rejoin the EU proper? You know, a few options there. On each one, just a majority goes, but they haven't got the confidence to do that. Angels, but Phil, they won't put their letters in because of the local results, in my opinion. They'll use that as an extra excuse to use. They know he's a massive liability at this point. Yes, but the thing is, I mean, again, it's one of these questions, isn't it? Like I said, I don't know. For all I know, the letters are going in at the moment. They're not even waiting for the local elections. I don't know. If they've not gone in this week, though, surely they will wait for the local elections. There's no point in putting them in the beginning of next week. I mean, apart from anything else, Parliament's gonna get, it's prorogued next week. So we've come to the end of a parliamentary session. So Parliament's been prorogued at the end of this week. So I don't even know how they put their letters in. They may use that email system again. But they won't be swanning around Westminster necessarily. But again, it's like, you know, they may just wait for the Privileges Committee. I just think they're making a mistake if they do, because I think the longer they wait, I just think at the moment it's really difficult for a Conservative MP to later on get rid of him, because then they'll be asked, why didn't you do it earlier? What are they going to say they didn't know? If the Privileges Committee, if they're going to say, oh, well, we didn't know he deliberately lied to Parliament, it's like, are you stupid? Of course he did. And what's more, so the public believe that as well. But anyway, what would I think if Labour in the next general election introduced their campaign as Renewed Labour, Renewed Britain? Would I like it or not? They said their centre. I mean, I don't know about. I mean, I'm not good at coming up with slogans myself. I just know that what you need are some. The ideal political slogan. First of all, it has to be catchy, as in people can listen to it really easily. Secondly, it has to be fairly ambiguous. It has to mean. It has to be the sort of thing that you say it to a person and they don't ask a lot of critical questions about it. They just assume it means what they think it means. So get Brexit done. Level up Britain. You know, all of these things. Are the Conservatives levelling up Britain? No. You know, there was a question in PMQs today from a backbencher. What's Boris Johnson going to do about coastal communities? Our latest white paper is going to answer that question. No, it's not. You know, what we're finding out in coastal communities is they're getting less money from this government as part of levelling up than they were on the EU. Less money. So it's not, the government aren't even matching the money from the EU, the development fund or anything like that. They're giving them less money. They're certainly not giving them more. So, but nonetheless, those slogans work because people don't ask a lot of complicated questions. They just assume it makes what it means. Maxie there saying, make Brexit work. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know that that's the right slogan to go for, because the problem is, although it is absolutely a slogan that a lot of people can go and assume they know what it means, it's also a slogan that infuriates a lot of people that would be prepared to vote Labour under certain conditions. So I'm not a big fan of it myself. But that is what you need, though, these slogans. My worry is that Starmer is trying to be too cerebral about it, and he's talking about these policy areas. No, slogan. What did Tony Blair have? Education, education, education. When he was Shadow Home Secretary, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. Good slogans, because it can mean different things to different people. People will read into, oh yes, I agree with that. They're not asking a lot of questions. People don't ask a lot of questions about these things. If Boris has prorogued Parliament, what would stop the Tories ditching Johnson and not forming next Parliament until they put a caretaker leader in a massive bait and switch? Well, it's not up to MPs whether the next Parliament opens up. The Queen opens it up. So they have not. They can do what they want. I mean, at the end of the day, Conservative MPs can absolutely do what they want. They can trigger a vote of no confidence in as a party matter. That's not them as MPs. They don't need Parliament to be open to do it. As long as the only reason I say the prorogation might impact it is because the normal procedure for submitting your letter is you physically take your letter to Sir Graham Brady's office in Westminster. But he may not be about. So you could put the letter under his door and he may not get it for 2 or 3 weeks. So, you know, it may be, as I say, like over Christmas, they say, if you want to put your letters in, you can email them. You know, these people saying they're going to put their letters in the day after the local elections. Well, as I say, if I don't think there's anything to stop them going into Parliament. I don't think they're barred from the place. It's just that there's no business going on there. So nothing's going to happen to that letter until Sir Graham Brady goes back to his office, which he may not do. Labour need Phil and Alastair Campbell in their campaign. I don't think I should be trusted to run a campaign. I'd be very bad at it. They can ask me questions if they like. Alastair Campbell is a funny one. I don't know. It's like one of these things. So Alastair Campbell obviously was an architect of Labour's electoral success during the Blair years. So he absolutely knew his stuff then. I always worry though, and I completely agree with a lot of things he says now, but it's not a guarantee, because I always worry about the Arsene Wenger effect. So for those not into the football, Arsene Wenger revolutionised English football, came over here, took over Arsenal, dominated the scene for a few years. And then he had his little battles with Man United, absolutely spectacular. But he introduced different ways of doing things, and then they were adopted by other clubs and teams. The problem with Wenger is he came in, he innovated, then he stopped. So then 10, 20 years later, all of a sudden, he was getting beaten by others who took his ideas and then added other ideas on top and innovated themselves, whereas he just kept with his own ideas. And I do sometimes wonder, Alastair Campbell clearly was a great political strategist back in the late 90s and the noughties, and he still may be now. But it's not a guarantee, because the political circumstances have changed. Do we know that what he says about what should be done now is what should be done? It's always a tricky thing. Just because someone has proven competence in a thing, when you've got changing conditions, you know, like you take, for example, the best surgeon of the 18th century, you wouldn't trust them to carry out surgery on you now. They wouldn't be able to deal with the modern methods. Sam, thank you very much. It says, seen Sunak's comments today? Yeah. What are my thoughts? So for those who don't know, Sunak has said it would be silly to offer people support for energy prices right now. Which again, just, do you know what? I've kept saying, Labour wouldn't mind Rishi Sunak being Tory leader at all. They wouldn't mind taking him on a general election. The man's not an idiot, but he is politically naive. And he's shown it time and again, and this is another one. What a stupid bloody thing to say. And I know what he means as well. I absolutely know what he means. What he means is, if he offers more support for people now, then in autumn, when the bills go up again, he'll have to do even more. So what he's basically saying is, don't give anyone any help now. So if the bills go up in autumn, then he'll give them a bit of help. But if he gives them more help now, he'll have to give them yet more. So it's almost like, if this is the level of support now, if he leaves it as it is, come autumn, he can maybe ramp it up a bit and claim he's doing more to help people. Whereas if he goes up to that level now to help people, come autumn and the prices go up, he'll be expected to go up there. And he don't want to do that. He doesn't actually want to help people. He wants to do the bare minimum that is necessary to keep people voting Tory. The issue is that he's not doing the bare minimum. He's like a lazy student. So I've had students doing courses where there's like work to be, whether it be homework or coursework or whatever, and you'll get some lazy students and they do what they think is the bare minimum, but it's not. It's below the bare minimum because they're a poor judge of the bare, because they're just trying to do the bare minimum. Very often they fail to hit even that low bar, and Rishi Sunak's doing the same thing. Maximilian saying that Sunak is so disconnected from reality. I mean, there is an extent to which this is inevitable. When people talk about politicians being disconnected from reality, that it's true and it's also not true. There will be things that they understand better than the general public. But when it comes to the cost of living, right? If you are someone who is and Rishi Sunak hasn't come from nothing. He went to private school. His family were wealthy enough. Yes, he is way more wealthy than his parents, but he came from a background where bills weren't an issue. So he has never ever known a time when he had to fret over the bills. It doesn't happen these days because it's all online, but in the days when your bill would come through the letterbox, there were people, I was one of those people at one time, would fear that happening because it's like, I can't pay, I don't know how, and you're constantly juggling it. So I've been in that situation where you're constantly juggling it, and sometimes you can't. And do you know what? Your internet goes off or your electricity goes off because you haven't paid your bill. They've never been in that situation, so they genuinely do not understand. They have never been in a situation where they cannot afford the cost of living, even their very, very comfortable, even luxurious cost of living in some cases, and they never will. They do not fear it. When I've talked earlier in this video, when I said about even when people don't lose their jobs, when the economy is contracting and people don't lose their jobs, there's that fear of losing your job that stops people being comfortable spending, and that then worse, it's like a domino effect on the economy. If people stop spending, then that means businesses are being less productive, so even more jobs get lost and so on. Consumer confidence is really important, and they will never even fear losing, even if they lose their jobs, they're never going to fear losing the income necessary to be able to pay for their standard of living. So they don't understand these problems. They're intelligent enough to be able to appreciate them if they want to. You don't have to experience something to be able to appreciate it, you know. But they will never know, never understand it. Anyway, do I think the cost of living is the best way is to nationalise the national grid and buy something like British Gas and like the French EDF? Well, inevitably, I mean, here is the thing. Like the Daily Express were today banging on again about, what is it now? Is it the Passport Office, something stupid, where Boris Johnson's saying, oh, the performance is so poor, we'll privatise it if they don't sort themselves out. It's like, okay. And then the Daily Express is saying, oh, we're paying this much and what we're getting for it. As if, so what you pay for in your taxes, it's like, well, why should you pay those taxes? Why don't we just privatise it all? As if that suddenly makes it free. They privatised energy. Is energy free? No, it's bloody expensive. So when you stop paying for things in your taxes and you pay for it as a private consumer, it goes up, it costs you more. I mean, what a stupid argument, but unfortunately it's one that works. How insane is that? Privatise a company, but you still need that company, you still need its services, so you just end up paying more because you pay what it already costs to run plus their profits on top. And that's assuming that they run the company properly. What if they don't? What if they run it like the water companies or any number of other utility companies, where the people who buy it load it up with debt, they don't put any money into infrastructure, they don't, you know, they don't improve the infrastructure at all, almost no investment in it, they just make sure it's working so they can charge customers for it, and then even then they don't just take off the profit and distribute it amongst their shareholders. If it doesn't look like that's profits enough, what they do instead is they load up on debt so that they can pay the share. So the CEOs need to be able to give a good return to the shareholders to keep their job. So if they don't make enough profit, what do? They just pile more debt onto the company, which we're then liable for, basically. That's the government bailing out that company. Absolute madness. Of course, all essential public services should be nationalised. It would be way cheaper. What on earth? I mean, all this bollocks about private companies are more efficient, they run more efficient. I think bollocks. What on earth can a private company do that a nationalised company can't? What can they do? Nothing. It was the Passport Office who was blamed for letting workers work at home. Passport Office says there's no working at home, it's staff shortages. Wonder what could have caused that. Yes, exactly. Oh dear, where was I? Craig, there is the disconnected argument really that valid? I thought lack of empathy is more likely. Haven't experienced hardship but feel sorry for those who do. Lack of empathy is part of it. Like I said, you don't have to experience something to be able to appreciate a situation for someone, and therein lies the lack of empathy. But at the same time, if you experience it, you will also understand it. Because the thing is, if you don't experience it, someone has to explain it to you. But then you have to be willing to let people explain it to you and accept their wisdom. But yeah, I mean, this is absolutely what happens all the time. As I say, it really annoyed me, that Daily Express headline, because it's what they do all the time. They go, oh, this nationalised services, because it's exactly what they're going to do with the NHS. And it's like, oh, this national service is failing, we should privatise it. How does that make that better? It makes it worse and it costs you more money. You know, and it's what they pull every time. Like, when has there ever been a service that was privatised and got better or cheaper? Never. It gets worse and more expensive. Everything. I mean, I've lived through a lot of privatisations. I've lived through the privatisation of the railways. They're more expensive and worse. I mean, Andy Burnham recently going on about cheaper to get a return flight to Brazil or India than it is to get one to London from Manchester, where he's mayor. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. You know, Telecommunications, BT, when that was sold off. So now it's worse, and it costs a load of money. Water, worse. They keep moaning. They said last year, oh, we have to keep dumping sewage because of our crumbling Victorian infrastructure. Well, why have we got a crumbling Victorian infrastructure? It was privatised years ago, specifically because apparently that would unlock loads of money to upgrade this infrastructure. So why have we still got crumbling Victorian infrastructure? All that happens is they sell it off, usually knock down price to the mates who then sell it for a much higher price. We saw that again. And then what? You get a worse service because they're fully focused on profit, not the service. The government, if a government runs something, it can say our priority is the quality of the service. Obviously, yes, you don't want to chuck money at it. Yes, you want it to be efficient, but the priority is the quality of the service. As soon as you nationalise it, the priority is the return to the shareholders. Top priority, that is it. It's a cash cow, and it's for the lazy. Ultimately, people who invest money, and don't get me wrong, if I built up some money, I would invest it, of course I would. But people who are investing money and they're just giving it to, they're just chucking their money into an investment fund and leaving it, and you get a load of money out of it, right? Are you working for that money? No, you're not. You're not doing a blind thing for that money. So basically, private companies, because it's all based on people investing it, they're the shareholders, they get the money, the dividends. You're basically talking about a system where you make a public service worse and cost more money to give lazy people, well, that might not be lazy people, but to give people money who haven't earned it. Because it doesn't matter how you spin it, money you get off investments isn't earned. Unless, I suppose, you yourself play the market and you move it here, there and everywhere. But who's going to do that? That's crazy. I know someone who works in pensions quite high up. And they just said to me, if you ever get some money, she was sort of talking to me about it. She says, you just put it into the long term and don't dick about with it. Basically, just leave it there. But yeah, sorry, gets me upset because it's such, and again, it always comes back to, this is why I hate the media so much. It's so easy to explain to people how it's a complete nonsense. And if we had a media that was fit for purpose, it wouldn't be possible. In no country where you have a media that actually reports in the public interest, is it possible for the population to agree with privatising essential public services. That's not to say, I'm not a communist, I don't need everything privatising, okay? I even accept, there are some things that are of vital national security, like food supplies. I'm happy enough that we have supermarkets and farms run privately as long as everyone's able to get food and be able to afford food, right? I don't necessarily say that we need to nationalise all the farms and the supermarkets. I'm happy enough that, as long as people have got enough money, then that's fine. I do have a problem with services because not a single, if any of them were run properly and we got good value and good quality service, I would say, fine. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But not a single one, not a single public service that has been privatised is delivering, other than massive bills. There we go. Wales has no issues because they have non-profit company run the water because the ordinary shareholding company went bust, best water, lowest price, and stuff like that. Well, we have a few of those things technically around England as well. The Conservatives have actually nationalised a few things on the quiet, including part of the railway, which is obviously now the top performing part of the bloody railway system. It's what happens all the time, isn't it? I thought privatisation works with services where the public have a choice, airlines being the main success example. Are airlines a success? Trains being the main failure example, can't choose my line. Apart from the fact I wouldn't necessarily consider an airline to be an essential public service. Transport in general, yes. So buses, trains, yes. I don't think ordinary people need to get a plane to work. So I don't consider them an essential public service. But at the same time, I also wouldn't consider it a service that works either. I'll have to make this my last one. I will just sort of say that, because how many times, for example, will people not be able to get the flight they need? But as I say, it's not essential. At the end of the day, if you can't get a flight somewhere, boo-hoo. I mean, the only people who need to get a plane to work are the very wealthy, and they may well be using a private plane. I don't like that either. Okay, very last one then. Oh, can the NHS be saved from privatisation? No, it's already largely privatised. It's too late. I said in the 2019 general election, I said if this goes the Tories' way, it's too late. It's gone. NHS is gone. It'll exist in name. People won't realise, but it's gone. That's it. It's finished. And I don't know how long it will take to rescue it. I don't think Labour can rescue it if they come back to power. They'd need to be in power for 25 years to sort it out. And people will say, but when the NHS was started up, Clement Attlee, Ian Bevan, they, you know, I mean, they started it from nothing. They had a massive majority to do that. A shitload of money. Last one. Do I think the Tories want to win next time? Yes. I've said this before. You can argue some strategic benefit in losing, leaving Labour with a load of shit, bashing them for 5 years, then coming back to power for another 15. Because as soon as you come back, you can blame all the economic pain you inflict. You can blame it on that Labour government. Yeah, I can see the strategy in that, but no, they don't. The Tories, the only virtue they have is that they really want to win, which is a very useful trait for a politician. But we've run out of time, I'm afraid. We'll be back on Saturday, and then next week, just to warn you, so at the end of the month I'll put out the membership. So next week's Wednesday one will be just for the second tier of member. This Saturday is still fine like this. The following Saturday will be public, but only members in the chat, but any member. But I'll put those out on Sunday, because I think that's the 1st of May. But yes, thanks very much for coming on, everyone, and have a good evening.